If you hear a few fish and chip moments or cylinder bits of issues, then please forgive me. And I see there's a couple of Kiwis in the room anyway, so kia ora. Well, first of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Stuart, for that warm introduction. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous owners of this land on which we meet today and pay my deepest respects to the ancestors and elders, both past and present. I think it's particularly poignant on this day, being in this place with an outlook of Barangaroo and both Bennelong. It wasn't quite the love story that some historians make out to be, but recognition that finally Bennelong and Barangaroo will be back together in some form or another over the next 5 to 10 years. If you don't know the story of Bennelong and Barangaroo, then please go have a look, go and Google it. It's indeed a privilege being here with all of you this morning, and I'd like to acknowledge also the words of both my colleague, Chris Woodthorpe, and of course the message of peace and social justice he has just conveyed on behalf of the Secretary-General on this, the International Day of Peace. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of a very old friend of mine, Ron Wakel. Ron has just been appointed as Sierra Leone's new representative to Australia. Sierra Leone is a nation in transition from one of war to one of peace and stability. Ron is quite an inspiration in the role he now has before him, so please seek him out if you're interested in what's going on in that country, especially when it comes to trade, investment and jobs. And he's sitting right about there in the middle of the audience somewhere. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of two colleagues of mine from the Global Compact, David Folks of Generation Alliance, who's fresh in from Brazil this week, and also Peter Kelly, who's now ex-Nestle, who both of these gentlemen joined us on the board of the Global Compact a few years ago as we began to establish the local network here in Australia. What I'd like to do, though, is reflect on the words of the Secretary-General on this day, in the sense that he said, peace is one of humanity's most precious needs. It is also the United Nations' highest calling. And it's a very unique year in terms of having a look at sustainable peace and sustainable development. And so what I want to do is give you a brief history in time of what the United Nations Global Compact does, because I'm probably more than aware than most that many people outside of business and industry don't know what it is we in fact do. So on the cusp of the new millennium, former Secretary-General Kofi Annan took a message to the Davos World Economic Forum where he called on business and industry to embrace, support and enact a set of core values in the areas of human rights, labour standards and environmental practices. It was a call to arms by the Secretary-General in recognition that business should and must play a role in a world that is increasingly fragile, in various states of social and economic development, states of conflict, of war, differences of opinion and intolerance. The United Nations Global Compact was born. Today, under our Chief Architect, Gail Kell, we have grown to more than 8,500 signatories across 135 countries that make up our planet's largest corporations, industry groups, union movements, micro-enterprises and financial institutions. By 2020, we aim to have more than 20,000 businesses of all sizes and from all geographies involved. It is our planet's single largest corporate citizenship initiative. At our heart sit four fundamental and universal principles whereby business must communicate their progress now on each annually: human rights, anti-corruption, the environment and labour. 25 years ago, former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Brundtland, who later became the Director General of the World Health Organization, presided over the World Commission on Environment and Development. In 1987, a report widely known as the Brundtland Report was published and entitled Our Common Future. The Commission was one of the key driving factors for the establishment of the first Earth Summit in 1992 and what is now known as Agenda 21. The first Earth Summit was held in Rio de Janeiro, and for the first time the linkages between social, economic and environmental development were drawn. In many ways you cannot alleviate poverty unless you also are able to grow an economy and create jobs. You cannot address issues dealing with the environment and social justice unless you first empower the people not to be subservient but to be independent. And in order to achieve a sustainable future, you must establish the necessary government structures to support people and an economy as they move from poverty to independence. In many ways, you cannot achieve a lasting peace unless we properly and consistently address the fundamental societal issues that lie at the very core of many conflicts around the world. In June this year, 25 years later, and again in Rio, the world again came together with a focus on sustainable development. This time the linkages between social, economic and environmental development were much clearer. In a report entitled Resilient People, Resilient Planet, co-authors Jacob Zuma, the President of South Africa, and Tarja Halonen, President of Finland, made it clear that in order to achieve a sustainable world, a future we all want, that any recommendations and flow on from Rio+20 would require commitment and action from citizens across all sectors of society. From heads of state and government and local mayors to business executives, scientists, religious leaders, civil society activists, and not least the leaders of the next generation, today's youth. In a world post the global financial crisis where a lot of work needs to be done to rebuild the economies of nation states and regions, there was a general view that Rio+20 was not a success. I can tell you that from my perspective, that is far from the truth. One of the key differences between the first Earth Summit in 1992 and Rio+20 in June of this year is the increasing role business and industry can and must play when it comes to some of the biggest challenges our planet faces. Whether it is climate change, food and water security, population, education, health, poverty, alleviation, and the empowerment and independence of women, girls and Indigenous people. As an equal partner at the table, business and industry have, over these last 25 years, accepted more of the responsibility and accountability that participation brings. It used to be the case that civil society organisations and non-government operators were the main balancing actors in the debate and the discussion. No more. Another core outcome of Rio+20 was that fundamental and specific recognition that each of us play an important and equal role as symbiotic links in a chain, just as there are links between the three pillars of social, economic and environmental development. Whether we operate here at home or a developing country abroad, the very need to build and manage the business case for our social licence to operate is fundamental. Governments demand it, communities require it, our shareholders want it, our employees want to live it, and as a chief executive and chairman, director of any number of boards, I want to ensure that we deliver it. Put simply, a social licence to operate is where we engage with the local community to ensure that while there are obvious commercial imperatives, that we provide the very social and economic support programs such as jobs, education and health that will in themselves assist local communities grow. Good business is not about a win for the company and a loss for the community. It must be a win for both. A partnership of equity and equality. And as the United Nations has said on this International Day of Peace, where our theme is sustainable peace for a sustainable future, there can be no sustainable future without a sustainable peace. Sustainable peace must be built on sustainable development. This is the cornerstone role business and industry can and must play in partnership with others to bring about that which we all want most. Business and industry are and must be an owner and first responder when it comes to human rights, both at home and abroad, whether it be our supply chains in developing countries, the treatment of our employees, or the very real influence we can bring to bear on nation states to improve their own behaviour. Our business, therefore, must not only be about human rights, it is respect for the environment, ensuring we fight against corruption in all of its forms, and provide assistance and support to some of the most vulnerable in our communities. For in order to have a sustainable business, we must execute our social licence to operate. It is not separate from the work that we do to earn a profit. It is subservient to our profit. But it is an important factor of how we grow and develop. This is what the United Nations Global Compact is all about. As the American actor Nick Nolte once said, peace is an inside job. Our inside job is to get on with the job by aligning social, economic and environmental development towards the new Sustainable Development Goals that will ultimately replace the Millennium Development Goals in the coming years. Today, business and industry have not traditionally been owners when it comes to the MDGs, but that will all change in the post-MDG world, where we not only become contributors, we become owners. And we are already responding. In communities around Pekanbaru and Perawang in Indonesia, the parent company of Australian subsidiary Solaris are doing remarkable things under the leadership of Ada Greenbury, Steve Nicholson and Darren Brennan, not just through direct employment of locals, but investing in microfinancing projects that empower women into business, investing in skills-based agriculture and horticultural production for kids between the ages of 15 and 18, and working with producers for the direct supply of goods and services as opposed to imports, whose net result is supporting small business to grow. local Sydney furniture manufacturer Siebel, based here in Padstow, who monitor supply chains across Asia and has some of the strongest best practice principles for a medium-sized business that monitors things such as corruption and human rights abuses in the supply chain. Siebel's Managing Director, Greg Welsh, accompanied the Secretary-General to Burma in April, where we have established our 101st Global Compact Office. The work of the team at Oil Search on the ground in Papua New Guinea, who are working with the community to fight HIV/AIDS through the Oil Search Health Foundation, who are working to promote anti-corruption skills and education development. The work of KPMG's Director of Citizenship, Catherine Hunter, who resides right here in Sydney, and her tireless efforts to promote development in Indigenous communities across our far north, who also plays a global role in highlighting how those best practices can be shared with other people's communities and governments worldwide. The work of Jane Brodar, who until recently has been instrumental with Rio Tinto's community engagement program, who has worked tirelessly in the extractive sector when it comes to women's empowerment and Indigenous development, having previously played a senior role with UNICEF in some incredible challenging conflict zones. The work of Deakin University, who has been back and forth to India in the last few months gearing up for one of that country's largest sustainable governance forums and helping us take the UNGC message on the road. And then finally, the work of our very own Diversity Council of Australia and Business Professional Women. Both organisations who recognise that diversity in the workplace is not just about breaking glass ceilings, it is about the empowerment of women in our society who should receive equal pay for an equal day's work, where we can do more to invest in small business startups for Indigenous women and women from migrant communities. In that sense, the work of BPW's Marilyn Forsyth, Frida McCarlis and Irene Ross, along with the Diversity Council's Noreen Young, are a significant contributor to a debate that sometimes gets lost in the clouds and ivory towers of other representative bodies. Each of these people has a face and don't just represent an organisation. It is also representative of the fundamental intergenerational shift that is occurring, whereby we ourselves recognise that unless our behaviours change, the behaviours of business and industry, then we will continue to face the same challenges day after day and year after year. I personally do not want to be known as a usual suspect. So on this day of all days, I don't just want to stand before you and make yet another speech. I want today to be the starting point of a new call to arms where we work together not in a piecemeal fashion, but with equal respect for our positions, philosophical approaches and ideologies. Because as I've learned over a long period of time, we can in fact reach our common goal through the identification of our single common purpose. So what does this mean? Well, today this is what I intend to do as a business executive, a member or chair of various boards, and as your representative to the United Nations Global Compact. I commit to growing the network and signatory base of the Global Compact here in Australia, and working with our signatories to establish our presence into Oceania and Pacific, which also includes the potential opening of our first Global Compact office in Papua New Guinea. I commit that we will double our target in efforts to sign business on to the Women's Empowerment Principles and, in collaboration with UNICEF and Save the Children Fund, promote the new Business and Children's Human Rights Principles, which we here in Australia have been instrumental in developing. We will continue to monitor signatory performance when it comes to anti-corruption and the environment, increase our number of leadership groups running here in Australia, and increase our dialogue around policy and advocacy. As a member of the board of the Australian Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, I want to ensure that we shift away from a pure focus on social issues, important as they are, and increase our efforts on sustainable economic development, focused on building initiatives that support financial literacy, small business establishment and entrepreneurship. I want our Indigenous people to not just be AFL footy stars and sports people. I want them to be doctors and nurses, accountants and principals of schools. I cannot wait for the day that one of our Indigenous brothers or sisters becomes the Premier of one of our states, or even the Prime Minister or Governor-General of this country. At the Australian Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, we are working right now on building those programs. We should aspire, but we should also and must invest. As a member of the Board of Suicide Prevention Australia, I want every life to count, but I want to see better coordination in the sector, greater investment on prevention, and more talk about the issues. In particular, I want to ensure that whether your first language is English or not, young or old, your sexual orientation is different to mine, or you live in a regional or remote community, you have the same access to the very services needed to keep you with us and not lost from us. So as you can see, business executives like me can and I hope do make a difference. Increasingly, we are stepping forward with the support of initiatives such as the United Nations Global Compact to show you that what we do is in fact real and not all smoke and mirrors. I dare say there are some corporations out there that are smoke and mirror machines, but they are being overtaken. We are influencers of positive change and can, in our own right, use that influence for better outcomes for all of us, not just some of us. So how do we reach a sustainable peace? One path is through sustainable development, with all of us sharing responsibility and working towards our common narrative. To close, I could probably quote any number of well-known people and leaders, such as Desmond Tutu, who once said each one of us can be an oasis of peace. Or Nelson Mandela, my personal favourite, who said that peace is the greatest weapon for development that any people can have. I prefer to quote my own father, who taught me the greatest lesson in life. He was a proud Māori and instilled in me, with my mother Margaret, not just values but a very simple philosophy. In Māori, Miri, my father, gave me the following for my own life's journey. He aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is the people. I draw no distinction between your or my ability to make a change and to make a difference. We are all equal partners in that respect. I don't care if you're black or white, man or woman, young or old, Christian or Muslim, speak differently to me or not. I simply see each of you as a person, and at the end of the day, if we recognise that all people are important, then we can and will reach a sustainable peace. That is my message to you. Stuart, thank you very much for having me today and for your final year with the Sydney Peace Foundation. And if I could just finally add, if I was on the voting panel, the judging panel for 2013, you'd be the under greyhound of the race, mate.
Well, in your own words, you're an unusual suspect who's just done a first-rate inside job. Peace. Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite my very good colleague